Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to our virtual event, Bound with History series, Spring Gardens. We are very excited to have you here. And with us, we have two excellent speakers. So my colleague, Elizabeth Shoemaker, our rare book librarian, will be introducing them shortly. So we would like to request you to please hold on to your questions until the speakers finish with their talks, and then we'll begin taking them one by one. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat. I would also like to mention that we'll be recording the event as we mentioned before, and closed captioning is available via Zoom. So if you see that option on your Zoom screen, please feel free to turn it on. So on to Beth.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're excited to have two really excellent speakers with us today. Our first speaker, Andie Thrams, hikes and kayaks into the remote wilderness to create her art using watercolors, gouache, and ink, as well as dirt, bark, fungi, and leaves that serendipitously entwine with her work. About her practice, she writes, "When I sit quietly in wild places, studying each leaf and color, every brushstroke weaves me more intimately into my surroundings. Separateness fades, and my sense of wonder and reverence for life forms that continue to thrive on our small planet deepens." Dr. Cassandra Quave is curator of the herbarium and assistant professor of dermatology and human health here at Emory. She teaches classes on medicinal plants, microbiology, and pharmacology, and uses her research in biochemical analyses in these areas of the traditional treatments of skin diseases. And hopefully she'll tell you more about that. In addition to her extensive publishing activities, her biography lists 109 scientific works. I assume that probably that's old, so we're probably topping that now. She's also creator and host of the podcast Foodie Pharmacology, which I will link to later on in the chat, that explores links between food and medicine. So we're going to begin with Andie Thrams. So please welcome Andie Thrams, who's coming to us from California with thunderstorms. So we're going to hope that she stays with us throughout the event.
Me too. You ready for me to dive in, Beth?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you for the intro, and thank you, Chella and Cassandra and Aaron and Beth and the Rose Library and Emory for making this happen and having me join you. I'm excited about it. I'm also really grateful to the collection for holding my work and sharing it with the world. It's a really nice feeling as a book artist to know your books live somewhere where they're shared and protected through time. It's actually a really amazing feeling. So I'd like to start with a thought from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, each thought, each action in the sunlight of awareness becomes sacred. So with that, let's see. I'm going to share my screen. And it's Zoom, so we're gonna hope for the best and expect the unexpected. It always happens, so forgive me if things are a little wacky. They already are. Okay, I have to go back. Thanks, you guys. We got to start at the beginning. There we go. All right, that's better. So, you know who I am. And this is home. This is the small riverside community of Coloma Lotus and the Sierra Nevada foothills, where I live. These are some of the tools and toys that I take outside with me to work.
And
the outdoors.
We can't see your slides.
Oh dear. Okay. I'm glad you told me. Let's go back. And Let's try again. Share screen. All right. Good at the beginning.
Perfect.
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks.
Oh, good. Okay. So you already saw that. We'll skip. Here's Coloma Lotus. Here's my tools and toys. So the outdoors is my primary studio. Almost all of my work happens outside. So I have various kits for carrying things about. And a lot of my work explores biophilia. So that was described by the late beloved biologist E.O. Wilson as our deep tendency as humans to love what is alive. And this is a little video showing where we live. This is a couple of springs ago, painting in the fields of California poppies that some years just bloom in great profusion. This would have been about the same time of year as right now. And way down below, you can see the American River that flows through our community. We live about a 20-minute walk from this spot. So I don't plan ahead very much for my work. Instead, my paintings are spontaneous responses to particular moments in time and particular places. This painting is called October Moon, and it was painted in Yosemite Valley. And I almost always work in forests. Sometimes I weave hand-lettered text into my paintings. Usually the writing has to do with what I'm seeing and hearing, feeling, direct observations of nature. And so in this way, my work is all a form of a field journal. So if we go back in time a little bit, a little backstory here. I studied art and science at UC Berkeley in the early 70s. While I was there, I learned about career paths in scientific illustration, natural history illustration. And I realized I could probably combine my love of being outside and learning about plants and drawing and painting into one job. And it was the perfect job for a long time for me. I eventually started a business called Larkspur Graphics and published my work as note cards and posters. So all along, ever since childhood, I've really enjoyed being in the outdoors and coloring and painting, just sitting on the ground. As I grew up, coloring books became diaries, which evolved into field journals. And eventually in the mid-90s, I landed at the San Francisco Center for the Book because I wanted to learn how to bind my own field journals so that I could use any paper in any size and any number of pages. And that was when I learned about artist books. I had never heard of artist books before, except maybe Sonia Delaney's famous work in an art history class. Other than that, I really wasn't very aware of the artist book form. But as soon as I found out and received a little nudge of encouragement from people at Center for the Book, I started to think of my field journals as my primary art form. Instead of being source material to come into the studio and create paintings from, I started to transform my field journals into artist books. So it's allowed me to work on folded or rolled sheets of paper, combine text and image. I love the sequential aspects. I love accordion books for the way they echo folding screens and Shinto shrines. And I've always felt like books are very similar to walking into a forest in that you can't really tell what's in there until you enter in. And then things are revealed gradually. So I really love the whole idea of the book, and artist books in particular. These books are part of an ongoing series called Field Studies, and they all focus on particular plants or a habitat. And these books are part of a series called Field Studies. And see, I'm going to see, I can't move that. Hopefully that's not in your way. This is a series called In Forests, and they've all been made in different forests throughout the West, from California all the way up to Alaska. They measure about 9.5 by 8 3/4, and when fully extended, they open up to 114 inches. I used a grid template in every single book in this series. There's so far 36 books in this series. And I used a template inspired by medieval manuscripts and based on some of the sacred geometries that they used for their page formatting. And I used a consistent format, and it allowed me to go into the field with folded folios, not already connected, but separate folios, and then write or make large paintings or small paintings or drawings, depending on time, within discrete spaces that were already drawn out. So it was really a fun way to work, and I loved it for a long while, but I haven't done one in a while. I'm working differently these days, and this is more the way I approach it all now. Is I'm working all over the whole page and then folding it later. This is also this is a book in the birdsong series, inspired by birds that I hear, because I sit so still for long periods of time, usually alone. I hear and see a lot of birds, and I've learned to identify them by song so that I can keep painting. And you can see in this detail the little Pacific wren, one of my personal favorites. So how does all this happen? I sometimes go out for a few hours or a day, but the very best is when I can go out for days at a time. And this is backpacking in California, Sierra Nevada. You can see our bear cans, the way we carry food so the bears can't get into it, and our camp stove and sleeping bag and thermarest and all those art supplies. This is sea kayaking on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And you can see in the lower left, our kayaks tucked into the forest. So up there, there's vast white sand beaches right up against, well, right between the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and lush, almost impenetrable temperate rainforest with ginormous, beautiful trees. That's where that little book, Birdsong, that you just saw was painted. Huge western red cedar, Sitka spruce, western hemlock. It's really a wonderland. And we were out there for almost 2 weeks. All of it, tents, sleeping bags, art supplies, food, have to fit into those kayaks. This is backpacking into the Sierra Nevada to a backcountry grove of giant sequoias. Because it's about 9 miles from any road, not so many people go there. And this is another form of wonderland. I've been painting and exploring this forest for well over 20 years. And this is going to be a little short video. Listen for the bird. It's a hermit thrush. And these are some other trips and other projects, different parts of the Sierra Nevada. And again, the very best thing is being able to go for many days at a time. It's a much different experience to be immersed in a truly wild place for many days. But that means you have to carry everything. Ford streams, hike tall trails over high passes. And this is the reward. These are the Foxtail Pines that grow. They're the last anything other than tiny little alpine plants. You can see that we're right at tree line here. Beyond these foxtails, no more trees. They're just the most eccentric and beautiful trees. This is well above 10,000 feet in Sequoia National Park. So this is coming back from that trip during the pandemic summer. As wildfires were burning more and more across the state of California, that experience of biophilia for me started to become overcome by sadness and worry. So many dead and dying trees in the West. So much smoke and ash. So many wildfires. So in the early days of the pandemic, when we were all trying to figure out what was going on and how to be in that moment, I really wanted to come up with a way to grapple with the difficulties I was experiencing. I really felt overwhelmed with sadness about our environment, about our social environment, about science and scientists, and I didn't know what to do. And then I came up with an idea, and that was to explore the concept of solastalgia. So if this is a new word, I'm glad to introduce it to you. It was coined in the 80s by Australian environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht. It's basically a word to describe that sense of heartache and homesickness for the home that is forever different and changed due to human destruction. So I'm sure many of you know what I mean by this. So I decided to look at my own personal experience of solastalgia. I learned through losing my parents and the wisdom of hospice and the guidance they provided, how important it is and empowering it is to embrace and go deeply into one's own sadness and grief. It's how we move back into our own joy. It's a real paradox about being a human, but I decided to apply this concept to my own sadness and grief about habitat loss and changes in Western forests. So here are the materials. I work on kozo, large sheets of rolled up kozo, working with ink, different kinds of ink, mostly Sumi ink. I designed a really nice folding easel that I could take with me, and I work with found forest materials, wildfire charcoal, ash, tree sap, forest fungi, in addition to ink and watercolor and gouache. And then occasionally I apply mica and gold leaf later for some shimmer and shine. So this is that pandemic summer in the West. So much was burning. You had to either wear a mask for ash and smoke or for COVID. This was a national park and I was required to wear a mask. So I went out into the forest there, carried my stuff as far as I could, set up my easel, sat on the ground and got to work. These are some of the prayer flags in some of the different forests where I've worked. When I sit down, before I begin painting, I meditate, I close my eyes, I invite the sadness to visit me, I look around, and I ask for help from all the beings in the forest to share any message that needs to be shared. And then I paint. Sometimes it is really sad, and sometimes it is really wonderful. Usually I'm working alone, but I can occasionally convince others to join me because it really is a fun process. These are some of the forests where I've worked. This is the Nelder Grove of giant sequoias outside of Yosemite National Park before and after the railroad fire. This is Oregon's Willamette National Forest, the H.G. Andrews experimental forest on the left, a lush, very green, intact place. And on the right, an area that burned in the huge holiday farm fire that burned in 2020. This is the Alder Creek Grove of giant sequoias in Southern Sierra. It's Sequoia National Forest. It's been the site of more giant sequoias burning than any other place in the world. Huge numbers of sequoias have completely burned. These are standing, dead, charred giant sequoias. You can see them towering high above other very large trees, sugar pine and white fir. It was the most devastating burn I've experienced or seen. As far as the eye can see are hillsides and mountainsides of burnt forests. So I invited and continue to invite scientists to collaborate with me through sharing information they would like other people to be aware of, that they've learned about through their forest research. So I incorporate a scientific concept into each forest prayer flag, along with an action to take, a hopeful action to take. This is the lovely cabin in Sequoia National Park. It's a field station where I've been able to work. It's also where many scientists from all over the world come to work in Sequoia National Park to study the giant sequoias. And these are the prayer flags hanging in a secret forest in Sequoia National Park. The ancient practice of hanging prayer flags originated in Southeast Asia, and it is believed that winds carry blessings depicted on prayer flags over the landscape to all beings. I just think that's the most beautiful idea I can imagine. So that's part of my project too. And here's one last quick video, a feeble attempt to show the size and beauty of these amazing trees. They're so big, I can never remember how big and beautiful they are. When I return to any of these places, I'm all over amazed and dazzled by what they are and that they continue to live. I'm also going to be sharing forest prayer flags with kids and adults, teaching them how to make their own and go into their own sadness and joy being in forests. These are some recently completed ones. I'm mounting them on canvas and they're going off to various exhibitions. These are some of the others in my studio. You probably recognize some of them behind me right now. Many organizations and individuals have helped me and continue to help me with this project that I'm so excited about. And I'm also grateful to each of you for being here right now and joining our program, to Beth and Chella and Aaron and Cassandra for doing this today, and to Emory and the Rose Library. May the winds carry blessings of healing and resilience through the forest, and beyond.
Andie, thank you so much. That was really quite amazing. Maybe during the question, I know that you have an overhead camera, and maybe during the question and answer period, you might we might come back to you, and then you can show us a little bit about how you work. So we'll again, if you can hold your questions till the end, and we'll go ahead and see what Dr. Quave has to say to us.
Okay, sorry, I had to find the unmute button. Thank you so much for having me today. Can everyone see my screen? I've lost my...
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, good, because I can't see it for some reason on my computer. Okay, so inspirational, Andie. Your work is just incredibly beautiful, and looking at it makes me think of some of my favorite times in different forests, observing plants and thinking about all those complex interactions between not only between plants, but also between all the other creatures that we find in these amazing locations. And so today I'm going to tell you a bit about what we do in the Emory Herbarium. I am an associate professor of dermatology and human health at Emory. So I'm split between the medical school and the college, and I curate the herbarium. An herbarium is a natural history museum collection. It's much like a museum of dried plants. And I'll tell you a bit more about how we form this museum and how it's curated in this talk. And so what is an herbarium? Sometimes when I tell people that I curate the herbarium, they ask, well, where is your greenhouse? And where are all of your beautiful, lush, growing plants? And we don't actually grow plants in the herbarium. All of our specimens are dried and preserved on acid-free paper, as you can see in this image. And once they're in this state of preservation, they're stored in these cabinets that are sealed. And if cared for properly, herbarium specimens can last 500 to 600 years or more. And so what's really great about these is that the types of collections that we make today can actually serve scientists and researchers well into the future. And so when it comes to the scientific aspects of an herbarium specimen, there are different elements of data that we include. First, I just want to make note of the artistic beauty of herbarium specimens. For me, these are it's a combination of science and art. There is an art to the way that you press the specimens, the way that you lay them out on paper. It's important that we include not only vegetative materials, so here we have leaves, but also fruiting or flowering aspects of the plant. Does anyone in the audience know what this species is? The common name, maybe use the chat, I'll put on my teacher's cap here. But the common name is the Mayapple. So this is actually a source of an important anti-cancer drug known as etoposide. So this link between plants and medicine is something that goes back way into history. Now, when it comes to the data around plant specimens, we have not only the plant material itself, but we also have information on the scientific or Latin binomial name of the species, where it was collected, and a short description and the name of the collector and the number of the collection. So in this example, this is a collection or a plant specimen that I collected on May of 2015. It was my 452nd such specimen of plants that I collected and deposited in the herbarium. Here in this upper corner, we have a number. This is the number known as the accession number. So this is accession number 24,008. This is a 24,008th specimen that's been deposited in the Emory Herbarium. You'll also notice that we have some barcode information with color codes, a ruler, and this barcode down here. And this is all important because today we digitize our specimens. So we make all of our specimens into digital resources in addition to physical resources that are accessible on the internet. And our collection is deposited actually with Cernik, which is a Southeastern regional network of collections where they can be viewed by scientists and students and just anyone interested in looking at them. Now, globally, there are around 3,000 herbaria in over 165 countries with an estimated 350 million total specimens. And this tradition of collecting and creating compilations of plants really began in the 1400s. And you'll notice here with this kind of abbreviated history of herbarium collections that the collectors were often physicians. Now, a lot of these early collectors were physicians because these were built by physicians as a means of studying and teaching other doctors which plants are useful as medicines. Because again, they heavily relied on plants as a source of medicine. So we have the Italian physician and botanist Luca Ghini in the late 1400s, who mounted them onto paper. And so while we have books also of illustrated plants, the difference here is that these are actually examples in which they actually collected the live plant when in flower and pressed it flat and glued it into bound books. So this is a very special and unique distinction from illustrated botanical books. We also have later on in the 1600s, we had the first use of the term herbarium. So almost 200 years later, after these books were starting to appear, did they actually receive a designation of a specific name of herbarium. Now, Carolus Linnaeus, who we all know for his innovations in the naming of things with binomial systems of nomenclature, modeled, by the way, off of indigenous ways of knowing, of using multiple names for species. He was the first to really transition from binding these into an individual book to storing them as separate sheets, as individual specimens. Today, herbaria store their collections as individual pages, as these individual specimens. So we use that method today. And they're often sorted based on their phylogenetic alignment, so whatever families and genera that they're organized under. Now, the oldest extant herbarium was created by the Italian botanist and physician Ghini's student Gerardo Cibo in the 1500s. This herbarium is located in Rome, and it was actually established in the 1500s in 1532. Some of the largest herbaria in the world are located in Paris, in England at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, the New York Botanical Gardens here in the US, and also a botanical institute in St. Petersburg, Russia. And here are just some different images of these great institutions where these collections are housed. Now, there have been initiatives to digitize many of these specimens. However, this is a very long and ongoing process. So many of these collections are still not accessible online and can only be viewed in person by visiting scientists. Now, let me tell you a bit about the Emory Herbarium. It was established in 1949, and today it houses around 25,000 specimens. You'll see this code GEO. There's an international index of herbaria codes, and our code for Emory's herbarium is GEO. And we have over 21,000 vascular plants, but we also include bryophytes, lichens, and fungi. Now, when it comes to the distribution of our collection, we have a very strong representation of flora from Georgia. And uniquely, we have a collection of flora from the granite rock outcrop ecosystems, such as that of Stone Mountain or Arabia Mountain Natural Heritage Site. In fact, Arabia Mountain was designated as a heritage site based on specimens that we actually house here in Emory's herbarium. So really unique species that we have in the collection. But we also have collections from broader locations from other states. And most recently, when I took over curation of the herbarium, we've expanded this greatly to include many specimens from international locations, ranging from collections in Italy to Albania and Kosovo to Pakistan, China, Lebanon, Morocco, South America, and beyond. So we're starting to really get a better global perspective on the collection. But we also collect a lot here locally in Georgia. These are just some fun images of some of our expedition teams on prior expeditions. In this case, these are photos taken at the Jones Center at Itchaway, which is a research station that's based in a longleaf pine forest habitat. So really beautiful 30,000 acre intact habitat of longleaf pine. We're wearing in this picture these funny looking covers on our pants. These are rattlesnake gaiters because these can protect us from getting bitten by rattlesnakes in some of the sites where we work, but really an amazing place to collect. Now, I mentioned this term of digitization a few times, and what this does is it basically provides a resource for where visiting scientists or scientists from really anywhere in the world can, or students or others just interested in learning more about the plants of their region, can go to this site. It's the Cernik data portal, S-E-R-N-E-C. You can Google that and find it easily. It was sponsored by NSF. And we've been fortunate enough to be one of the contributing herbaria to this portal. And so you can go through and look at high resolution imagery of many of these species. And again, not only access the images of the plants, but the locations where they've been collected. Now, something that is important to note is that in some cases, we have specimens from plants that might be in some way threatened in the wild. And in those cases, we can actually disguise the location information so that we don't encourage poaching of some of these more threatened species. We also take these specimens of both our visible specimens, but also incorporating our digital collections into our outreach and education initiatives, where we work, for example, with students at the annual Atlanta Science Festival to really start to get children more engaged with the natural world and the science of studying the natural world. Now, herbaria are useful not only for documenting life at certain places and at certain times, but you can also come to an herbarium if you have questions about the identity of a plant species. We can also provide information on or provide material for studies on DNA analysis to understand the evolution of different plant species, or to trace the origins of how different plants were named. We can also look at where some species might have been located in the past, in places that may today be a Walmart parking lot. We can tell you if once upon a time, certain species of value were once located there. Here are just some other images of the work that we do in the field. And as a scientist, beyond our work in the herbarium and collecting these specimens, we also do a lot of research in my laboratory group, where we collect specimens that are then studied for their pharmacological properties. There are over 33,000 species of plants on Earth that have been used in different systems of indigenous healing. And yet, from a scientific perspective, we know almost nothing really about how most of these plants work as medicines, which compounds are responsible for their activities, and if they're safe, if they're effective. And so we're really trying to push the envelope in the research group of understanding how some of these medicines work. And then importantly, returning that information back to communities that are stakeholders in maintaining and holding that knowledge of their use. Since we're talking also about bound books of herbarium specimens today, I just wanted to show you a fun little project that we currently are exploring in the herbarium. This is an enigmatic specimen book that was found in the upper shelves of one of our cabinets. There was no identification information or no records in the herbarium of who the creator of this book was. There was no name of the collector in the book itself. We have completed digitizing this, and a student, an undergraduate student actually this semester, did a lot of work documenting and evaluating the species that are represented in this book. It's actually quite incredible collection that represents 106 specimens in 101 species of ferns from Jamaica. So this is actually quite a large representation of those species. And we've done some digging looking at hand writing evidence, and we have a hypothesis that this may have been produced by a former curator of our museum, of the Carlos Museum, that was here at Emory in the 1920s. However, we have not gotten conclusive evidence of this. And so there's another possible candidate that we're exploring. But it's kind of one of those fun mysteries at the museum to try and understand who created this really lovely bound book of ferns that can be used in research again by others. Looking forward, I also want to just let all the audience know about an exciting expedition that we have planned. During COVID, we weren't able to do field expeditions with our research teams. So we missed 2 field seasons, and this year we decided to go for it, and we are going to be joining our research partners based in the Balkans, working across the borderlands of Albania and Kosovo in these amazing high alpine regions of the Shari Mountains to collect specimens for deposit here at the Emory Herbarium, but also to do some research in collaboration with our partners at the University of Pristina in valorizing the efficacy and safety of some of these herbs that are not only being used by local people as medicine, but which are also going into trade. If any of you take dietary herbal supplements, an amazing 8% of the entire global trade of dietary botanical ingredients comes from this small region of the Balkans. And yet we don't know much about the status of some of these wild populations of medicinal plants that are believed to be quite under threat because of overharvesting. And so this expedition is going to be completely crowdfunded. So this is my shameless plea for support. If you'd like to join us, you can go to our Emory Momentum website to learn more about the expedition and see how you could help. If you'd like to learn more about the herbarium at Emory, you can check out our Instagram and our Twitter pages. We try to post regularly with specimen images and highlight some of our amazing work that's done by our Emory students. And lastly, if you're looking for more educational resources about the role of plants in health and medicine, I can recommend a few resources that I've created, including my podcast, the Foodie Pharmacology podcast, which explores the links between food and medicine. I also have a YouTube channel. We have many educational videos on, again, on the science behind many of our medicinal herbs. And I also have a book out this past year on my journey as a scientist. And so I'll stop there and thank you all for your attention. I'm excited to have some questions.
Thank you so much. That was really, I've learned a lot in both of these talks today, and I can't wait. I've been sort of chomping the bit to go over to the herbarium, so this maybe is the little spur that I need to actually get over there. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat. We'll see those, or you can use the Q&A, whichever you prefer. And maybe while you're sort of gathering your questions for either or both of our presenters, maybe Andie can show you a little bit. She's got an overhead cam with her, and she can show us a little bit about how she works. So if you have questions, go ahead and throw those up either in the chat or the Q&A, and maybe we'll do a little trot back to Andie's setup here.
You bet.
We do have a general question. We would like to just bring that up. There's somebody in the audience who's asking how to save the chat.
I think you can copy and paste it. I believe it gets saved with the video.
Yeah, I think so too. But you could always, I think you can just kind of scroll up to the entire Control-C and then just paste it onto a Word document or something. Just thought I would mention that before we miss it. So.
I think I know how to do that actually, though I don't know how to get rid of that window. Sorry, everybody, for if there was a window over my images during my presentation. But if you go to the lower right of your chat window, there's 3 little dots. And if you click those, you can say save chat.
Oh, thank you, Andie. It's really helpful.
Tech support.
One more thing I learned today.
Anyway, I have out a couple things that I can share with you till we have some questions if we have any. This is just, I think it was probably shown in my video. This is just a little roll up that is modular. I can have more or less stuff in it to carry different brushes around and tools into the field. Really fun and easy to make one of those. This is my tiny little palette. I have bigger palettes if I have more time and space, then I'll take a bigger thing. But what I love about this is it's metal, and my little water container just can sit on there and not fall off. So that's kind of a nice setup. And then these are actually books that are recently completed that you would have seen me sitting in those giant sequoia forests working on. So there's a series that I've just finished and showed at Codex called Backcountry. And these are some that are left, I think. Yeah, they have some stuff on the back. And here I can zoom in a little bit because there's some, something I really love doing is adding gold leaf to sort of echo that idea of illumination. So they're just these little, you can see they're smaller than an iPhone. So they're very easy to carry. And I cover them and complete the binding process back in the studio. And I usually use cave paper for my covers and end sheets because it's just so earthy and beautiful. This was one that was in one of the images. Here, I'll back out again here.
Andie, we have a question for you as well.
You bet.
From the chat, can Andie talk more about how she collaborates with the scientists? Are the questions inspirations, or do they show up in the artwork?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an ongoing thing that I'm doing. The questionnaire, I developed a questionnaire to make it really simple for scientists to answer questions. And basically I wanted to know, scientists are learning all these amazing things and they're sharing it through their peer networks, not necessarily unless they get published in some popular outlet. The rest of the world doesn't know what they're learning about. And so one of my biggest questions is, what would you like others to know about what you've learned? And sometimes I write notes into the work, but the finished pieces are going to actually have an accompanying piece of paper that is going to describe a scientific concept, something like what resilience means, or what about mycorrhizal fungus connecting plants in the soil to each other? Any of bark beetles. People are really curious about bark beetles because they're just wrecking havoc. And so information about bark beetles and then since so much of that scientific information these days is in the dire side, I'm also suggesting an action to take, whether it's contacting an organization, visiting a specific place, or even an art project you might do with a kid, to take action to help. So hope that helps answer that question. Scientists are really into sharing that information, by the way. Many of them seem to have lost hope that people will listen to them. And many scientists seem to love the idea of artists sharing science because maybe we can hit people in another place in their heart instead of their intellectual process. So we just try to get the information out there any way we can.
Thank you, Andie.
Cassandra, I think someone asked in the chat if mayapple is currently used in cancer treatment. And I guess more broadly, I'd be curious to know the research that you've been doing with the chemical analysis has led to using any of these compounds in treatments for things generally.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So the mayapple has this amazing history. It was used by Eastern tribal groups in the US to treat warts and unusual growths on the skin. Later, there was a compound isolated from the mayapple root that's known as podophytotoxin, which is also used still today in wart remedies. But that compound, that molecular blueprint, was used as the model to develop a cancer drug known as etoposide. And etoposide is used today still to treat things like testicular cancer, certain lymphomas, there are a number of different cancers that it's used to treat. So it's not that they are taking the plant itself and eating that in any way, because this is actually a poisonous plant, but is a compound that is modeled after one of those major constituents from the plant. And then the other question was about our work on botanicals. We're definitely trying to see what we can do to not only understand how these medicinal plants work in the context of traditional medicine, but also push the envelope forward and trying to translate these towards the clinic. So the closest one that I have towards clinical care is a composition of the Elm Leaf Blackberry, which is this beautiful blackberry that grows in the Mediterranean. And it actually works really effectively in blocking the way that staph bacteria stick to surfaces. And so that is being developed as an ingredient in a medicated bandage that we are working with another company to try and get FDA approval on that. So it's not yet approved, but it is something that we're working towards.
Cassandra, we have another question for you. What preservation methods does the herbarium use for fungi?
Well, that's tricky. So with plants, with plants, most of the time you can kind of smush them down to paper. With fungi, we will often slice them up and then dry them and store them in little boxes. In some cases, we'll dry them whole, and we're just talking about the fruiting body. So kind of like the mushroom cap that you think of when you eat mushrooms. That's the part that we store in the herbarium.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Another question for Andie has come up. Someone here had heard that you're working on a project with a group of book artists. Could you talk about that collaboration?
Yes, I am. It's called Hope with a question mark. Or at least I think that's the project referred to. I'm involved with several collaborations, but the big most recent one is a book arts project with Peter and Donna Thomas and Susan Loudermilk. And we all had been personally impacted by fires in 2020. And we decided to respond by working together. That was all we started with. Yes, it was at Codex. We didn't really have a plan. We thought it would be helpful to share some science, learn some science, and process our own concerns about what we thought was just going to focus on fire, and then expanded into thinking about climate change in general, because you can't really separate our Western forest fire issues from climate change. It's pretty entwined. If I move over, there's a wooden box behind me there. Actually, maybe I'll just go grab it. Sorry about that noisy chair. This is what happened. We created this reliquary of 12 different artist books, and we each worked on most of them. Some of us just worked individually, but most of them were collaborative. Inside the reliquary is a little vial with ash with kind of an herbarium type tag on it from ashes in the wildfires where we worked. And so I'll leave it at that. If there's more time and people want to see more, glad to share more.
Andie, I'm curious, is that an edition or is that a one of a kind that you each have?
It is. It's in an edition of 32, 12 different books in each edition. So we made a whole lot of books. Yeah, I'd be glad to, let's see if there's one I can pull out quick here. this was one of my favorite ones. This was called Resilience. And we just divided the edition into different parts, and we each worked on each part, and then we sent it in the mail to each other. And we painted and printed and set type and worked on top and underneath each other's work. That was a really exciting one.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's been a great project. And it's almost totally done now, which is a big relief.
Other questions from the audience?
I have a question for Cassandra. I'm curious about where you're going in the Balkans and why that is such an area with a focus on traditional medicinal uses of plants.
Thank you. That's a great question. So in these high mountain regions, oftentimes rural communities are actually cut off from any like trade with major cities. And so they actually have to wild gather or grow all of their foods, all their plants they use as food throughout the year, and medicinal plants also for medicine throughout the year. So they really rely heavily on their wild resources as medicines. And the snows are so bad and the roads are so bad that there can be months where they have no contact with the outside world. And so they're very good at really surviving in this kind of independent way in these remote regions. And there also just happen to be an amazing number of medicinal species that grow in the region. So if you've ever heard of medicinal plants like yarrow, there are many different species of yarrow that grow in this mountain region, including a number of threatened species that are present in very small numbers. And so one of the graduate students that we're working with at the University of Pristina in Kosovo has found some concerning information that some of these may actually be entering into trade, being sold as Achillea millefolium or the common yarrow, when in fact they're these threatened and critically threatened species that should not be traded. And so we're trying to get a better understanding of the trade of medicinal plants and also how it affects the local economies of people in the region, because wild harvesting and selling certain species is a way that they really help them survive. And unfortunately, we don't really have many mechanisms for fair trade in these kind of wild species. Like you have fair trade coffee, right, to ensure that local growers get a fair income. But we don't have that often in the medicinal plant trade. And so we're trying to get some more information around like what this trade looks like, and also look at the safety and efficacy of some of the different plants that people are using. And the Balkans, I mean, Andie, you should travel there someday. I know you would fall in love with it. And the alpine meadows are like paradise on earth. If you can imagine a tapestry of orchids, of terrestrial orchids and wildflowers in full bloom, it's just amazing with the mountains in the distance. It's an artist's dream. It's my dream every time I go there. It's so beautiful.
Cassandra, I have a question about what you just said. First of all, I would love to go to Kosovo. So when something is critically threatened, does that mean you take samples or that you do not take samples?
That's a really good question. When things are critically threatened, what we do as scientists is try and document it through non-destructive sampling. So like if we can harvest a small part of a plant for deposit at the herbarium, at the local herbarium, we're not bringing those types of specimens out of the country. And we photograph and document GPS coordinates. And so, for example, we can have high resolution photos of these that can be taken in the field, combined with some of our field notes is another way of documenting them. Yeah, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Andie, I have a question for you, actually. Have you ever accompanied a scientist on a field expedition? I think you're on mute. And is that something you'd like to do someday?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. I love talking to scientists and accompanying scientists. It hasn't happened often enough, but really early on, that was how I started. I was part of a project in Yosemite National Park's backcountry and drew while I was there and got to follow scientists around, and then eventually did the illustrations for the project. So yeah, not nearly enough. Mostly I interface with things like the questionnaire, interviewing, but not actually having the opportunity to work alongside, which I think would be amazing, because I think there's so much common ground and such a shared belief system, really, in the importance of careful observation and information sharing, whether it's through image or word. It's all important.
Well, I think too, it's, there's so much you can do with art that you can't necessarily do with just a scientific paper. Like there are lots of scientific articles on biodiversity loss and, ecosystems that are under threat. But there's something I think that is really unique about what you can do through artistic expression to really draw people's passion to an idea. That can be accomplished in ways that a simple graph or scientific statistical analysis is not going to do. Yeah,
I totally agree. And I think you can really almost seduce people into learning something.
yes,
And I don't mind doing that.
that's great.
Thanks. I love that question, Cassandra.
So we have a couple of questions. From the first one is from Andie's pastile days. I have a poster she created in 1985 for the UC Berkeley Botanical Gardens. The Astrolameria blooms are simply lovely. Thank you. So not a question, but a comment.
Wow, how fun is that? That's really going back there. That's some ancient history.
And for Cassandra, there's a question. You have mentioned high altitude plants in the Balkans, but what about other regions like tropical islands, desert regions? Indigenous people all over the world have discovered developed medicinals and from whatever they have on hand. So are you collecting from other areas as well, or are other people doing that work, or?
Yeah, they're absolutely right. I mean, this is what's amazing about the field of ethnobotany, which is the scientific study of how people use plants, is that no matter where humans have lived in the world, they have always used plants as a means of survival to, to feed themselves, clothe themselves, for musical instruments, for art, for medicine, and so on. So absolutely, there are incredible systems and traditional ways of knowing how to use plants in different regions of the world. And we also study different areas of the world. So for example, later in the year, we're going to be looking at medicinal plants found in Egyptian oases, which I'm really excited about. We've partnered with collaborators, as I mentioned, in the Middle East, in Lebanon. We've partnered with collaborators in South Africa, in Colombia, in the Caribbean, on the western coast of the US, here in the southeastern US, and other parts of Europe, China, Pakistan, the list goes on and on. So there are an incredible number of plants that need to be studied, that we would benefit from studying not only their status in the wild, of understanding if they're under threat, but also looking at ways to really understand their potential for improving human health and well-being across the globe.
Oh, and another question from Andie for Cassandra. What information do you wish you could have shared with everyone of what you studied? So she's sending the questionnaire to you.
Oh, okay. So Andie, what do you mean the with the people I work with, the collaborators in the communities, or?
Yeah, no doubt you have learned so many different amazing things, but of those amazing things, is there something in particular that you really wish everyone knew about, like the whole world, or at least a lot more people than know now, about something that really matters to you? Oh,
that's such a great question. I think, there's we're at a point of critical loss, both in biodiversity, but also linguistic diversity. And some of the saddest things that I see in working with communities is, I spend a lot of time speaking with elders, and their languages are disappearing, and the know-how of how to use these species is disappearing. And so, some of the things I wish more of the younger generations appreciated, what is this body of knowledge, and just how important and incredible it is that these elders have this knowledge, and that it should be really cherished, and that our habitats should be cherished, because we're losing them way too quickly. I think those would be the most, the biggest things. And I think also just that all of us can make a difference. It can all seem very overwhelming, but there's small choices we can make in our day-to-day lives in, trying to reduce consumption of products that lead to deforestation, or in just getting to know the species in your own environment, going on a walk in the forest and stopping and looking, and whether you're drawing or writing poetry or taking photos or painting. I myself don't have many artistic talents, but I certainly have an appreciation for art and just the value of sitting and being in an environment. I think that's something we can all do.
Well, unless there are any more questions popping up, which I don't see, just let me double check the Q&A. No.
Yeah, I don't think we have any more. Yeah.
Thank you both so very, very much. This was a really wonderful session, and I have a feeling that maybe Andie and Cassandra are going to be in conversation continually. But thank you all for joining us, and we will post the recording on YouTube in the hopefully near future. And Andie and Cassandra, thank you both so much for being with us and bringing us such great presentations and information.
Thank you, Andie, and thank you, Cassandra. Thanks to Aaron as well for making sure the Zoom ran smoothly throughout, and to all the audience for making this a lively discussion. So
thank you, Beth. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Chella and Cassandra.
So everyone, have a good evening. And
good evening.
We'll see you next semester for our next Bound with History.